It's a very different ball game from when you go from being a single person to being in a committed relationship. You have to make that mental and emotional mind shift that things are not just about you anymore. But at the same time, you can't lose yourself in being part of a couple. It's a very delicate balance to say the least. So to give us an idea how to handle healthy compromise and respect for yourself and your partner is relationship coach Frank B. Kermit. Frank, thanks so much for coming back to the Kelly Alexander Show.
Thanks, Kelly. Great to be here again.
Frank, is one of the first things you need to be clear about to yourself before getting involved with anyone your own idea of personal boundaries? And can you give us an idea of what those things might be?
Absolutely. Before you get into a committed relationship, you need to know what your deal breakers are. Things that you will tolerate very well and that you expect from your partner, and things that you will not tolerate well at all, that if they start to happen in the relationship, it will mean the end of that relationship. So let's go through a couple of examples here. We'll choose something pretty benign. Let's say your personal boundary is you don't want to be with someone who smokes cigarettes. And this is something that is easy to define. If you want to date somebody, they can't be smokers. Maybe you have asthma or maybe you just don't like the smell. If you start dating someone and it turns out that the person that you really, really like is a social smoker, well, if you really know yourself, you'll know that you cannot deal with that type of issue because it's a personal boundary, and you just won't get serious with the person from the very beginning. It's prevention rather than cure. But if it turns out that, well, I really, really like this person, and I guess I don't mind the social smoking so much, well, this is a sign that you don't really know what your boundaries are. And although, you're going to have a relationship after that, it is a sign that there's a possible red flag in the future because you might be wishy-washy about other boundaries. Now, you might not actually be wishy-washy, but that's the way it's going to be communicated to your partner. If you're not going to be firm on your boundaries from the beginning of the relationship because you're constantly changing them, the day comes when you really mean, no, I will not tolerate this, your partner is just likely not to believe you.
And Frank, a question I had for you in just what you said, if you sort of have this red flag, like with the smoking, the social smoking, and you're like, yeah, I don't know about this, and then in your own mindset, you sort of, well, I know I'm not going to take this very seriously, how do you not, or do you tell the other person? Like, do you, because it's almost like it's a mental shift that's happened in your head saying like, you know what, this person already has this against them. I know I'm not going to take it seriously, so I'm just going to have some fun. Like, to me, that's not good. Do you communicate that right away, or do you just sort of keep it to yourself? Because it feels like you're lying to them.
Well, if you reach a point where you really feel that you're not going to see the person seriously and then this is just for fun, when that topic comes up in conversation where the person says, well, what are we exactly and where do we stand? You're going to have to be honest with the person and say, I don't see a future here, because our values are different. And you will communicate to that person what values you're talking about that matter to you. In the case of, let's say, dating a smoker where, okay, the person smokes socially, I know that I can never get really serious with this person because I have asthma. Well, if, you date the person, you enjoy their time, but as soon as the person starts saying, do you ever see us lasting together in the future? Do you see where this relationship is going? You be honest. You say, actually, I don't see a future for this relationship. And you can say exactly what your reason is. Long term, I don't want to be with someone who smokes even socially because I have asthma. So unless, something like that changes, well, it's not even an idea I'm going to entertain. Now, I know that seems really harsh, but one of the risks of going out and having a relationship is that you're going to meet people you like but still can't make it work with them. And that's okay. That's one of the risks you're going to deal with. And if you're just not comfortable dealing with the risks or dealing with potential confrontation or dealing with loss, then those are separate issues as to whether or not you want to be in a relationship.
Now, Frank, how do you really come to understand your boundaries and deal breakers? Because, just like you sort of mentioned earlier, you might have it in your head that you will never deal with, a smoker or someone who's a workaholic. But then, you meet this person, and even though they do work a lot and they don't devote as much time to you as you would like, you really like them. You really, and like it's even surprised you that it's making you sort of rethink your earlier boundaries and deal breakers. Like, what do you do there? Because it seems like it's, you're even doubting yourself in that moment.
It's very important that from as early as you can to get as much relationship experience as you can and to date as many different people as possible. One of my personal rules is I will only date someone once a week until I have any reason to see them more often or get more serious. And by dating them once a week, I'm still dating others. In my philosophy, commitment of that sort or monogamy of that sort must be earned. There has to be a reason that I would not see other people while I'm seeing person number one, unless it's a monogamous lifestyle you want. If you want to have a monogamous lifestyle, then you need to see the person as often as possible, so that way you can make a judgment much sooner about whether or not you want to see this person long term. And as soon as you say, no, I don't see this going long term, end the relationship, be ethical about it, don't lead somebody on, move on to the next person that you want to get to know. The more people you date and the more life experience you have, the more you're going to find whether or not you can actually handle a particular boundary. On paper, everything looks good. Well, I'm going to want this kind of relationship. But if you're not realistic in other areas of your life in terms of, let's say you're thinking for an employment career. I mean, you're going to have to be realistic that certain types of jobs require a work schedule that you might not like. You don't go into it thinking, well, the industry is going to change for me. Well, no, you have to be realistic, and it's the same thing with relationships. You have to set realistic boundaries and deal breakers. And if you're not realistic about it, you're going to find out pretty quickly where your boundaries actually are. The second part of this is that there's a difference between what people like and what people respond to. And it's so important to realize that when we're talking about relationships, we're talking about emotional needs. And emotions are not logical. So you might have wonderful ideas about who you would like to date, but if you respond to a certain type of person that does things that would be against your boundaries and deal breakers on paper, you need to come to terms with that and work on yourself to reach some sort of resolution.
Joining us on the show is relationship coach Frank B. Kermit. You can check him out at www.franktalks.com. Frank, I'm assuming that if you do realize something that you thought you could handle, but then in reality you can't, you better be honest with yourself and your partner that you can't compromise, because I'm assuming in the long run it's going to blow up in your faces anyway.
Exactly. What tends to happen with couples whose values are not being respected because they may have a boundary or deal breaker, they may not have even realized how important it was to them, but they're starting to feel violated. Even though everybody was honest in the beginning and you did go into it with a fresh heart and ready to take the chance, if you feel that your boundaries are being crossed, you're going to start feeling resentment. It's an emotional reaction. You don't choose your emotions. You're going to react to the way you're going to react. And if you start to feel resentment towards your partner, that resentment will lead to contempt, and these things will break the foundation of even the best possible relationships. Look at people who have been together for many, many years, and you just see that, yes, at some point there was some initial love there. There is still an underlying love and commitment there, but they're just angry at each other, and they're snapping at each other because they've had resentment built up over the years. So let's say you want to get into a relationship with somebody, and let's say the person that you're dating wants to have an open relationship and you've been traditionally monogamous. You don't know how you can handle that, but you say, I'm willing to give it a try. And you start dating and you start understanding that the person you're with is going to see other people. If you are truly a traditionally monogamous person and you're dating someone who only does the open relationship structure, and you're not finding yourself adapting to this new type of relationship structure, you're going to start to feel resentment. And even though everybody was honest and everything was fine and everybody is open about what's going on, so there's no infidelity, if you're still feeling that resentment because you're expecting the person to change or you really didn't expect yourself to react this way, you need to come to terms with that. And you need to communicate to your partner and say, look, I thought I could handle this. I really gave it an honest try, but this is not working for me. And it's hurting me, and I'm going to end up hating you. And in that process, I might end up hating myself. This has got to end. The most ethical thing you can do sometimes is to break up with somebody that you are incompatible with. because you're by staying in that kind of relationship, you're not doing the right thing. You're doing the wrong thing. You're hurting everyone involved in ways that the damage can be progressive.
Okay, I think that's very important for people to realize that I don't think you can sweep things under the rug because eventually the dust is going to build up anyway and come flying out at some point.
That's a beautiful analogy. I couldn't have said it better.
Okay. Thanks, Frank. I feel better now about myself. Frank, I think there's also, a difference between compromising on something you really don't care about and then something you really do care about.
Oh, absolutely. When people talk about you have to compromise in a relationship, what they're saying is the stuff that's not that important to you, ignore it, forget it, let the other person have their way if it's important to them. But you never compromise on your values, and you never compromise on those boundaries and deal breakers, because that's when the resentment starts to build. Let's say you are, in terms of a lifestyle here or in terms of eating habits, let's say you're a vegetarian, and it's something that's really important to you. Well, dating someone who eats meat and who brings meat into your house, and you have certain rules about that, if you start compromising on something that is such a fundamental part of your lifestyle, you're going to start to feel resentment, even as great as the person is, because the vegetarianism lifestyle is very important to you. That's not something you compromise on.
Okay.
However, let's say it's a matter of the color of the wallpaper in various rooms in the apartment or the house. Let's say you really don't care either way, if it's blue or if it's green or if it's polka dots or a pattern or whatnot. If stuff like that really is not that important to you, those are the things you compromise on because you figure, well, it doesn't mean that much to me. Well, what do you think, honey? Do you like it? Do you have a preference? Maybe your partner has this thing where they like a very particular color. They absolutely want Viking blue on the wall and ceiling. Okay, if it's not something that is going to challenge your boundaries and your deal breakers, those are the things you compromise on.
Let's say you are compromising on the color of the wall because you don't really care. I find that sometimes then the person who ended up compromising it say, yeah, honey, I don't really care, go for it, whatever, it's all good. Eventually, I feel like they make a bigger deal out of the fact that they did compromise, like later on the road, like down the road, like it could come up in an argument or something, say, well, it's not like I don't compromise, I compromise all the time, I let you have that blue color you wanted. And it's like you make it a bigger deal than it was and still is to you initially. It's almost like you're grasping at something to prove your point in that current situation. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying?
Absolutely, it does make sense. We're human beings, and the one thing about human beings that you can be pretty well guaranteed, no matter how little or how much somebody compromises, everybody feels they compromise too much. And that is not a sign that they're being taken advantage of in the relationship. Usually, there's a major issue going on that people are afraid to talk about, so they start picking on a lot of smaller things, because that is what's triggering the anger, but the anger and the resentment is already there. I might turn around and say, I compromise a lot because I agree to let the wallpaper be yellow in the entire house. But what's really bothering me is that chances are the person that I'm with has violated my boundaries in some other area, but maybe I'm too afraid to talk about what's really bugging me, because if it is a core value of mine that's being violated, it could spell the end of the relationship. So always remember that when people fight about things, especially on the issue of compromise, they're not necessarily fighting about the particular things they bring up. It might be a symptom that there's a core hurt going on somewhere there, and they're afraid to bring up that core hurt.
And I think that the person, and both people, I think you really need to be self-aware that that's what's going on, because I think it's like you get caught up in the little details, which really aren't anything, when it's something, the elephant in the room that you're not talking about.
Exactly. Whenever people fight about the small things, whether or not the toilet seat is up or down, or whether the toilet paper roll is over the top or down the back, those things just are not that important. Usually there's a much deeper issue that nobody's talking about because they're afraid that communication might be the end of the relationship. What most people don't realize is that if there's an underlying resentment there, that more than anything is going to spell the end of your relationship.
in a relationship, is compromise ever equal, or does it inevitably sort of end up being that one of the people involved ends up compromising more or less?
I always look at it, I get this question actually quite a bit because I deal with couples who, again, they've built up some resentment over the years. Here's what I let them know. As long as your core values and boundaries are being respected, it doesn't matter who's compromising more, who's compromising less. It's a wonderful intellectual construct that everything is going to be equal and everything's going to be down the line. And the fact is, we're human beings, and the theory just does not work in practice. There's always going to be one person who compromises a bit more than the other, but that's because one person might have a lot of really important values and boundaries that they want, and the other person might be a lot more easygoing, where they want the main things looked after, and then for the other stuff, let the other person have their way, because they really don't care. So yeah, there's always going to be one person who feels that they're compromising more than another. And in fact, the person who's compromising less usually feels that they're compromising more than their other partner. The key here is what you're compromising on. If you're compromising on stuff that really isn't that important, but the main values in the relationship are being respected, your main boundaries and deal breakers are being respected, then it's all good. It's when the main things that you really value are being crossed. And then that's when you have a problem. And all the other stuff just becomes an annoyance because at the core of it, you're not feeling respected in the relationship.
How do you truly respect your partner in a relationship, Frank? Because I feel like this is different than respecting yourself.
Usually, what I recommend is that you find out exactly how your partner wants to be treated. Because we all take the attitude, I'm going to treat others the way I would want to be treated. And again, intellectual construct. Works on paper, but in real life, how I want to be treated in a situation might be different from the way someone else wants to be treated. So I need to find out how my partner wants to be treated in that particular situation and whether or not that treatment is in line with my current value system. If it is, treat the partner how they want to be treated. So let's just choose a particular example, right? You mentioned the workaholic earlier in this interview. So let's say one of the partners is a workaholic, and they come home, and the way the workaholic would want to be treated is not to be asked about work. They don't want to think about work when they come home, and they may turn around and say to their partner, you know what, go off, go have fun with your job, go have fun with your career, just do it, I support you. Meanwhile, the partner is saying, well, I want to hear about your day. I want to hear about your job. I want to feel a sense of connection with you again. So in that case, both of them want the same thing. They want to encourage one another. They want to connect with each other, but one of them wants something that the other one wouldn't want. And it's very important to realize that it's not just about you. You have to treat your partner the way your partner wants to be treated, because that's when your partner feels respected or special.
Okay, Frank, that's a lot of work. I guess just to sort of round things out with regards to compromise and respect, if you are in a relationship and you feel like things are, the ship is leaning over way too far to the left, how do you right the ship and how do you know when to abandon ship?
Okay, when the ship is leaning too far to one side than another, first of all, you have to take responsibility for that. Nobody can really take advantage of you without your permission. And Landers taught me that. So if you really feel that you're giving up way too much in this relationship, you have to come to the issue of why you allowed that to happen to yourself. Because at any time, you could have put your foot down on something earlier. This is where we look at your own repeating behavior pattern. So if you can identify the repeating behavior pattern that got you into this situation to begin with, that's when you're in a position to not make that mistake again in the future. Because even if you jump ship and you go with someone else, chances are it's going to happen again. Because the issue is you at that point. How do you rectify the situation? Well, you talk to your partner and you say, look, I can't deal with these specific things, and these specific things have to stop. Because if they don't stop, I can't continue in this type of relationship because I'm feeling violated. I'm not feeling right about this. It's not working for me. Now, if your partner turns around and says, well, I really don't care what you think. I'm just going to go ahead and do my thing. That's a pretty good sign when it's time to jump ship, because it means that your partner is not interested in your boundaries or helping you feel balanced or healthy, emotionally healthy in the relationship. If your partner says, okay, let's see what we can do, what is it you need? And this is where you have to know yourself, and you have to know exactly what it is that you need in a relationship in order to make it work for yourself. This is a very frustrating thing for most people because they don't know what it is they need, but they expect their partners to figure it out. And that isn't fair to the partner. So if you're going to say to your partner, I don't know what it is I need, but this isn't it. Well, it's not your partner's responsibility to figure out what makes you happy, especially when you don't know. This is where emotional maturity comes in, because only an immature person expects the other person to figure out all of their problems and their particular idiosyncrasies.
Okay.
You have to be able to communicate what you need, and if you don't know, don't expect your partner to figure it out. It's up to you to figure it out. At that point, maybe you shouldn't be in a relationship. Maybe you should spend some time alone and learning about yourself. But that can be really, really scary to a lot of people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Frank, I think this has just been fantastic. I really appreciate your time on this today. Thank you.
Kelly, I absolutely love being on your show. I can't wait to do it again.
Thank you so much. That is Frank B. Kermit, relationship coach, and make sure to check him out. He's awesome. www.franktalks.com.